Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jessica Greco from EBSCO and I wanted to thank you for attending our WebEx series featuring Fred Kiel. We have a really engaging session planned for you today, and before we begin I have a few housekeeping items to review with you to ensure a smooth session. First, the session is now being recorded. A link to the recording will be available for you a few days after the webinar and will be shared with you via email. Second, all attendee lines are now muted to avoid any sound feedback or interruptions. If you are having technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to communicate to me and we will try to resolve this. We thank you in advance for keeping your line muted during the session. Third, there will be a chance for any questions you have for Fred following his presentation. If you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box at any time during the presentation to me directly. Finally, please stay on the line once the webinar is finished, as you will be able to access a free session takeaway. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's featured presenter. For more than 30 years, Fred Kiel has guided Fortune 500 companies in their journey to accelerate business success through principled leadership. Fred is the co-founder of KRW International. The foundation of KRW International's model is a rigorous data gathering and customized development process designed to provide transformative insight and growth. Fred is the co-author of the influential book Moral Intelligence 2.0, published by Financial Times Press, and the author of the book Return on Character, The Real Reasons Leaders in Their Companies Win, published by Harvard Business Review Press. He is also the speaker of the popular TEDx talk, Psychopaths in the C-Suite. Fred believes in a world where leadership character is fundamental to business education programs and performance evaluation processes. A world where who a leader is receives as much attention as what the leader is trained to do because it results in greater value for all. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fred Kiel.
Good. Thank you, Jessica, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm going to speak probably around a half an hour or a little more. I'd like to start out by, I'll tell you a little bit about the story behind the research and how we happened to get into this whole research of studying the connection between character and the bottom line. And then we'll go into the results of it in some depth, including the discussion of the impact that character has on the functioning of teams and on organizational life in general. I'll also tell you a little bit really clearly about how we defined and measured character, and as well as business results. And then at the last part, we'll talk a little bit about what everybody's always interested in is, can character be taught or can it be strengthened? But first, let me start with the story behind the research. It started about 10 years ago when I was in the office of a client of mine. His name was Doug Lennox. And at that time, Doug was the executive vice president of American Express and in charge of their field force of financial planners. Had about 12,000 financial planners across the nation that Doug's organization was in charge of. And Doug was a pioneer in using the emotional intelligence assessment tools that Dan Goleman had created for selecting trainees as well as training them. And that day he said, you know, Fred, he said, I've noticed something interesting. He said, there's a subset of recruits, he said, that score very high on the influencing skills, the emotional intelligence skills for influencing people, but they score very low on the integrity scale. He said, what do you make about that? And I thought for a minute, and it immediately came to me. I said, Doug, you've learned how to identify the con artists out there, the people that are really good at gaining your trust and setting you at ease and read your emotions while they're ripping you off in some way. Well, that led us into a deeper discussion about the emotional intelligence model. And then the more we talked, the more we decided that maybe Dan Goleman had missed something, that there's a deeper form of intelligence that sort of is the foundation for all of the emotional intelligence skills. And that was something that we decided that we would call moral intelligence. So then we realized we probably weren't the first guys that ever thought about this, so we hired a researcher to take a look at all of the literature and what had been written down through the years about moral development and character development and child development. We dug into the literature on evolutionary psychology, as well as the various fields of philosophy, and even got into the fields of the neurosciences and cultural anthropology. And it was in cultural anthropology that we really discovered something quite interesting, that the cultural anthropologists have focused in recent years on what people, all cultures around the world have in common. And it turns out that there are universal moral principles that are shared by all cultures around the globe. And we chose 4 of them. These are 4 that the cultural anthropologists tell us that parents all over the world teach their children to demonstrate the behavior in their cultures that demonstrate integrity, that demonstrate responsibility, 2 principles of the head and 2 of the heart, forgiveness and compassion. We reason that if leaders were to honor these 4 and demonstrate these consistently in their leadership responsibilities, that they would in fact get better long-term business results. So we created a leadership model around it and interviewed a lot of senior executives and ended up writing a book called Moral Intelligence. And the book was first published in 2005 by Wharton Business Press and republished as a 2nd edition in 2011, and it's been very successful. It's all over the world in 6 other languages and all of that. And we got a lot of positive press about it when it came out, but there was one particular reviewer that called me up, and his comments are what led me into this research. He said, "Look, Fred," he said, "I know you really like all that soft stuff." He said, "I'd expect that. You're a psychologist." But he said, "Let me give you a little lesson in business and in economics." He said, "What really creates value is the business model. And if you have a good business model and it makes a lot of money, you'll be able to hire the best kind of talent, and all that culture stuff that you think is so important will kind of come along for the ride." He said, "You know, it's nice to have. Don't get me wrong. I think it's really nice to have, but it really doesn't account for much. It's sort of a byproduct of a good business model. That's really what creates the value." He said, "It's nice to have, but it's really icing on the cake." And then he threw down the gauntlet. He said, "Besides," he said, "I've read your book, Moral Intelligence," and he said, "You guys don't have any data to support that claim." He said, I think it's just icing on the cake." Well, he threw that challenge to me, and I realized, I'd been spending my career up to this point helping leaders improve and strengthen the way in which they treat other people, which is sort of a reflection of your character. And I thought, if it's just icing on the cake, I've kind of wasted my career. So I still thought that he's missing something, and that there is a connection, and that the character of the senior leadership team does in fact add to the creation of value. That is a significant factor. So I thought, well, we don't have the data, but I bet we can get the data, and that's when I launched this research study. Now, I thought that it would take just a short time. I thought 2 or 3 years. Well, it ended up taking 7. But over that 7 years, we did enroll 121 CEOs in the study and their organizations, and we ended up with a complete data sets of 84. The complete data set included a lot of self-observations and the personal history of the CEO and a lot of assessment of their beliefs and attitudes, etc. But where we really got the most valuable data is we asked each of those CEOs to give us access to a random sample of 300 of their employees. And we surveyed those 300 employees and asked them their observations about the CEO, about the senior team, and about the organization in general. We asked them, such questions as just rate the frequency. How often does the CEO tell the truth? How often does he or she keep their promises, etc.? So that's what a complete data set ended up looking like. We enrolled CEOs from a cross-section of industry sectors. How we got CEOs into the study is the first one happened to be Jim Senegal, the CEO of Costco Wholesale, and Jim referred us to 3 other CEOs, and each one of those signed up and decided to participate in the research, and we asked them in turn to refer us to 3 others, and it went that sort of way it rolled out. And then I had the experience of sort of serendipitous experiences a couple of times of being on airplanes and sitting next to a CEO and talking to him about it and getting them enrolled in that way. So this is how we ended up, but it was sort of interesting that it came out as a cross-section of American business world. It's not heavily concentrated in any one sector, so we were happy about that. The results were quite dramatic. We found out that that reviewer, in fact, was wrong, that strong character leaders bring almost 5 times more to the bottom line than do the weak character leaders. Now, the weak character leaders are successful and they're bringing in profits and positive return on assets to the bottom line, but it's almost 5 times less than the strong character leaders. And then there were other findings that were also quite interesting, is that the high character leaders enjoy a much higher level of workforce engagement. And of course, that sort of makes sense, but nobody had actually had demonstrated the hard data to show this connection before. And then the companies led by high character leaders also had significantly lower levels of risk, lower audit fees, for legal events, no citations for tone at the top issues, etc. And then, somewhat surprisingly, we found out that the high character leaders were viewed as being stronger, having better leadership skills and better business skills. Well, let me talk a little bit now about how did we define leadership or define character, and move on to how we define business results. There's 2 ways of looking at character. One is the way that probably most of you on this call think about character. It's what's in your heart. It's your intentions. And you probably judge yourself as being a person of pretty strong character. Most people do, and probably most people are. The only problem with defining character based on intentions is that you can't measure it. Nobody can measure it because nobody really has access to your inner world. Your friends and people that know you very well perhaps think that they have a good handle on your intentions, but it's really your behavior that people judge your character on. And if you think about it, that's how you judge other people's character too. If you know of people who consistently tell the truth and keep their promises, a sort of integrity and responsibility, own up to their own mistakes, and then treat other people with kindness and curiosity rather than shaming and blaming, treat people as people, not as numbers, you probably judge them as being of a strong character person. So we used behavior as our anchor point for defining character. We said we're not really, in the sense, measuring character itself, but we're measuring the indicators of character. What's the reflection of character? Is the behavior that the leaders show in the workplace for around integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. We started out with 65 items, behavioral indicators of these 4, and we ended up with needing only 25 of them, and that's the 25 that we now have that makes up our character index. We discovered through this and came to understand that character is really a matter of habit. How you treat other people is really a matter of habits. These are automatic behaviors that occur without your being aware of them. You've become so used to how you treat other people that it's not something that you're aware of at a conscious level. So that's one of the things we came to understand about character. It's the behavior, how you treat other people is a reflection of your character, and these are basically habits that operate under the surface. Then we turned our attention to, well, I'm having trouble again getting to the next slide. There it is. Two of them. We decided we needed to understand what do we really mean by business results, and business results really come from 3 factors. They come from the macroeconomic factors that all companies operate with right now. There's macroeconomic factors of the low oil prices really hurting some businesses, as well as really dramatically helping others. And then there's the business model itself. If you have an up-to-date current business model, you're in good shape. If you have one that's being disrupted by someone else, like the taxi industry is by Lyft and Uber, then you have a major disadvantage there. But all of the academic research on business results show that return on assets as a universal measure of profitability is a result of these 3 factors: macroeconomic factors, the business model, and then what's something that has been known now is called the leadership effect. And the results of all of the research shows that up to 30% of the outcomes is determined by the leadership effect. And so the question then is, well, what is it about the leadership effect that accounts for this? And there's been tons of research done on what is it that really accounts for leadership effectiveness? Is it personality? There've even been studies done on birth order, certainly on education and experience and skills. And none of those studies have really shown that any of those factors were all that important or accounted for that much. We went on and looked at our data. We sorted our data then based on the education of the CEOs in our study and on the tenure, even on their voting records in politics and on their age. None of those things mattered at all. We sorted on the oldest versus the youngest, those are the most experienced, most educated versus others, and looked at return on assets. There were no differences. There was a difference with regard to size of organization. The larger organizations created more profit in general than the smaller organizations, but it was only when we sorted on leadership behavior around integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion that these differences really dramatically come out. There was that 5 times difference. So what we've really found is in that leadership effect box, when we sorted on personality and everything else, tenure and all of that, it really turns out that its character is the thing that really seems to account for it. So slide. So we were able, through our character survey of employees, to identify the strongest character leaders in our study and the lowest character leaders, and we end up calling them the virtuoso leaders versus the self-focused leaders. And go to slide. So when we rank ordered the CEO character scores from lowest to highest, it came out with a character curve that looks something like this. Slide. We found out that people's self-assessments of their character is not very accurate. All of the CEOs in our study rated themselves as being of high character. If you look at the bar graph here in the self-rating, there's virtuoso CEOs, the ones that their employees really saw as being strong character, was only 1 point different from how the self-focused CEOs rated themselves. But when you look at the 2 bar graphs on the right, you'll see that there's a big difference, that the self-focused CEOs were seen completely different by their employees. Slide. So this is how the hard data came out on return on assets. Is that the virtuoso CEOs brought in an average of 9.35% return on assets compared to 1.93 on the self-focused, and the middle group was at about 4.83. Slide. One of those CEOs, I already mentioned, is Jim Senegal at Costco. He's one of the virtuoso CEOs. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I would imagine that many of the attendees here are also members of Costco, and I would bet that no one has ever had a bad experience going to a Costco store. And that's because the principles that Jim honors of those 4 that we studied, integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion, is driven down to the lowest level in the organization. Managers of warehouse workers are told, don't think of yourself as a manager, think of yourself as a teacher. And how you treat the warehouse workers is how they will treat our members. And this is just part of their culture. I've made it a hobby to try to find a disgruntled Costco employee when I'm in one of their warehouses, and I haven't found any yet. It's not scientifically valid, but I get into conversations with them, and they all say that, what do you like about working here? And they always, after they talk about the benefits and the wages, they talk about how they're treated by their manager, that my manager has my back. I can talk to my manager about anything. So this is the kind of organization that virtuoso CEOs create. Their employees say they almost always tell the truth. They act with curiosity when other people make mistakes rather than bullying. They're quick to own up to their own mistakes, and they just treat us as people, not as objects. And of course, how the self-focused CEO is reviewed by their employees is, the term self-focused kind of says it all. Slide. So the positive organization that is created, next slide, looks something like this. And these are the factors that we measured on all of these 84 organizations. Of course, we measured the character of senior management at the bottom. It serves as the foundation. Then we measured next the conditions in the organization that, if present, we said you will have a highly engaged workforce. If the conditions in the workforce are that people are treated with respect, if there's fairness around compensation and recognition, lack of favoritism, if there's a culture of care and support, the organizational energy is high, and if the workforce has confidence in management, you will have an engaged workforce. And these highly strong character leaders also typically were highly skilled in creating or positive organizational dynamics around innovation and collaboration. We learned some really interesting correlations between forgiveness, for example, and compassion and innovation. And then, of course, the highly positive organization has clarity of vision and a good strategic focus and a culture of accountability. Go to the next slide. The differences between, on some of these organizational dynamic leadership skills between the self-focus and the strong character leaders is shown by this graph, that there's quite, and these are all significant differences. Slide. So we decided that let's take a deep look at what is it about this leadership effect. Go to the next slide too, please. It's not only what the leader does, and that's what most business schools teach, is the business and the leadership skills and the business skills, and pay little attention to the other factor of who the leader is. And it's more than just a additive formula. Slide. It's more than this. One more slide. It is the exponential relationship that who the leader is really serves as a magnifier for what, next slide, for what the leader does and for business skills. So strong character leaders were viewed as being much better business people, as being much stronger in their skills. And so I think it's possible you could have two equally skilled leaders, one with strong character and one with low character, and they're going to be viewed as either as much more effective as a strong character person leader than the low character one. So it really is a major factor. And I got some more data to show on this next slide. That this is how we ended up expressing this relationship, is the skills with character as exponential factor equals results. Two more slides. One more. And just keep going here. These are the relationship between character. You can see that you get an 18% delta in impact increase on skills. You get 26% bump on workforce engagement, and then the 5x bump on return on assets. And the only factor that seems to be driving that we could find was the character factor. Now let's talk a little bit about virtuoso teams. Next slide. We said that in order to be a virtuoso leader, you also have to have a virtuoso team. You have to have a team that is viewed by the workforce as being strong in these four character dimensions. But we found that there are other dimensions that separate virtuoso teams from the the weak character teams. Go to the next slide. That you can have strong character people, but if they don't know how to work together as a team and don't have positive team dynamics, that's not going to. They won't be a virtuoso team. They also have to have positive team dynamics, and then they have to be viewed by the workforce as having strong skills and as providing these workforce engagement conditions. And we got 3 more slides you can kind of flip through here quickly. That's the team skills and workforce engagement conditions. 70% of the workforce, as we know in this country, is not engaged. And I just read an article this morning about millennials, and fact is that I think this number really holds up for them, is that they just are not engaged in the workforce. And this, of course, is a tragic waste of talent to have this many people not engaged. In fact, of those 70% that aren't engaged, I think there's 18% of the workforce is actively disengaged, trying to bring harm to the organization. So it's this is a real challenge, and my explanation for why this is the case is that it's not because senior teams are not concerned about it. They are. In fact, this is the whole industry of employee surveys that are out there right now assessing this every year. And there's the common belief, and I think it's promoted by many of the employee engagement survey companies, that engagement starts at the bottom of the organization. And in one sense, that's true, but in a very significant sense, it's not true. That's secondary. Where it really starts is at the top of the organization. If the senior team is not viewed as being strong character, you're probably going to have trouble having people get a high engagement score in the organization. The people at the top really set the tone for in the whole organization. Now, most senior teams rate themselves and think of themselves as being high character. So when they get poor engagement scores, it's natural that they would search for the cause down in the organization because they don't see themselves as being the cause of it. But when we come in and do our benchmarking about what is the actual character reputation of the senior team, it often produces a great surprise for them. They see themselves, their self-rating is up in the Virtuoso part of the curve, and then comes the ratings. The first big surprise is ratings from their direct reports, which often has them down somewhere in the middle of the character curve, and then as you go further down in the organization, the results really begin to come apart down in the organization. So once the person's bubble is popped in that way, oh jeez, am I still on?
Fred, yes, we can hear you. Since I have the presenter rights, I'm still moving through the slides. So if you just want to call a slide, I can move through for you. Okay?
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, everyone.
I just don't have you on my screen anymore. My calendar interfered with it.
Oh, no.
So anyway, next slide is the subjects about can character be taught. And because because how you treat other people is a matter of habit, yes, it can be taught. You all know that you can strengthen your habits, your personal habits. It's not always easy, but we're discovering that there's really a three-step process. Next slide. Should be the one that says benchmark, discover, and elevate. And these are the three processes that we go through, and there are three questions associated. The first is, next slide, is where am I, or where is my team, our team, on the character curve? And that's what benchmarking survey will get you, and will probably pop the bubble for you with regard to thinking that you're viewed routinely as a high character person or a high character team, like you view yourself. And then the second question is the discovery process of why did we score where we are, and we collect a lot of open-ended comments in the benchmarking survey that we do, so that there are often some pretty dramatic hints there. But often a team will need to go into the workforce and invite feedback and ask for feedback. In fact, the third question of what do I need, or what do we need to do to move up the curve, is typically a process of going public with the data. Now, this requires the senior team to really be quite vulnerable, and to do that at town hall meetings or whatever, is to show how we were rated and to talk about it from their heart, about how this was much different than how I felt about it myself. But it's a thing that really energizes the workforce, and especially when the senior team said, look, we don't fully understand this, but we want to change, and we need your help. So coming back to the equation of the next slide, of who and plus what equals impact and results, in the next slide. So the question is what part of this equation do I need to change? I'll just make one last point here before we open it up for questions, that the next slide of what versus who. The temptation on almost all teams is to look at changes as being something out there outside of me that we need to change. We need to improve our communication, or we need to improve some business processes or whatever, and certainly those are important changes to make. But where it really becomes something that is change is when it challenges the mindset of an individual and individuals on a senior team, and those are called adaptive changes or vertical changes. So we can go into some detail on that and questions answered if people are interested, but I think with this kind of an overview, we can turn it over now to question session.
Great. Thank you, Fred, so much. I do have a few questions, and thank you for participants for sending those to me. If anybody else has any questions for Fred at this time, feel free to enter them into the chat box to me now. So Fred, I actually have a first question. So this is in regards to the survey you conducted.
Yeah.
So this question is, did any of the weak character leaders in the survey change their ways after seeing the results of the survey?
Well, our purpose in doing this was to collect data, and we did go back to every CEO in the research and spend an hour or two with them going over their results. The reaction of the self-focused low character leaders was pretty much they didn't want to hear about it. They were not very interested in it, and I don't know, because we didn't follow up longitudinally, if it stimulated any of them to do anything about it. But some of them were rather upset by the data and dismissive and challenged us on our research design and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure the way we presented it and came back and just gave them the facts is not the way we do it when we're trying to help people change. And we didn't follow up with any of them, so I don't know.
Okay. I have another question in regards to the survey. How many women CEOs were surveyed, and how did their character scores compare?
That's a great question. There were 9 women in the study out of the 84 CEOs, and that actually is a little higher percentage than the number of Fortune 500 CEOs who are women. So it's sort of reflective of the American economy, but basically this was a study of white, middle-aged male CEOs, because that reflects who we are. But nevertheless, and so statistically it's not a large enough sample to make a valid comparison based on gender. But I am the father of 5 daughters, and I was naturally quite curious, and so I went through the data, and on each of the significant dimensions of leadership skills and workforce engagement factors, women scored, as a group, scored a couple of points higher. The average score for the women was a couple of points higher than it was for the men. Now, it was not a statistically significant difference on any one dimension, but what was interesting is across all of the dimensions, women were consistently 1 or 2 points higher. So you can take that for what it's worth. It's an indication that women are pretty strong leaders.
Great. Another question is, just wondering if introverted executives whose character might not be as obvious, do they have poorer images, or are they at a greater disadvantage?
Well, we didn't measure extroversion. We didn't get into any personality measurements as part of our research, but I've got a long history of working with senior executives, and I found that personality is not a significant factor, that when you have a strong character, person stands out even if they're introverted. I know one particular CEO who's probably one of the more introverted people I've ever met. He absolutely hates being, of giving speeches and all of that sort of thing, but yet people will walk through walls for him when they get him into town hall meetings and he's able to relax and they do a Q&A kind of thing. His heart really shows through. And of course, it's in his behavior too, that he always tells the truth. He owns up to his own mistakes and treats people with great respect as people. So, if you think about personality traits, there are just as many people that are sitting behind bars that has your particular personality profile as there are out as successful leaders in the world. So that's not a big factor.
Great. The next question is, where do self-focused CEOs get their inflated self-assessment from? Is it from lack of self-awareness or a lack of honest feedback?
It's really lack of self-awareness. We looked really in depth, and I report about this in several chapters in the book of what both the inner journey was that each of these CEOs had, as well as their outer journey. And on the outer journey, the Virtuoso CEOs did get a better break in many situations. They had more supportive parents on average than the self-focused ones, and they certainly had other influential adults in their lives, like teachers and coaches, at a higher rate of frequency. But then you wonder, what's the chicken, what's the egg? Some of the self-focused leaders couldn't recall who any of their teachers were or their coaches, and none of them had mentors. Well, you know, you can do something about that. You can choose to have mentors. So on the outer journey, there were some differences. And on the inner journey, there was a really big difference. The self-focused CEOs just had not done any of the work of self-reflection and self-awareness, and most of them did not have a coherent life narrative. They, when asked about some of the traumatic things that they reported factually that happened in their growing up years, when asked what impact did that have on who the leader you are today, they sort of drew a blank. They'd look at me and they'd say, well, you know, I never really thought about that. Well, so they have not done that sort of reflective inner journey work that the virtuosos had done. So it came up, it trumpeted a lack of self-awareness. Great.
And then I have one more question. Any thoughts on how leaders can better engage with millennials? And this specific participant, their industry is hospitality, which employs a very large percentage of under 25-year-olds, and they are having real retention and productivity problems.
Well, tell them they should talk to us. We're working with this is in the software world. We're working with a company that the average worker is age 28, and they have people lined up at their doors that want to work for them. The average age of their management team is 44, but this is a management team that realizes that they have to be very transparent, they have to be extremely fair, they have to always tell the truth, and more than that, they have to really show an interest in the career path that the millennials are having, to the extent that you're preparing them to leave your organization if necessary. And you know, they have a good retention rate. They have a very high retention rate, as a matter of fact. Hospitality industry, I think the rules would be the same. It's how well the senior management walks the talk, and how they're viewed. What is their character reputation on the part of the millennials? How do they rate them? Do they believe that they are the suits in the senior suite that you know, are selfish and greedy and don't tell the truth and, you know, work only for themselves, or are they really there to create a healthy and a good working environment?
Great, thank you so much. That's all we have for questions. I want to thank participants for your questions, and thank you, Fred, for your insights and a wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for bearing with us with the technical difficulties. So right now, what I'm going to do is pass the presenter rights over to Greg DiDonato, who is the Vice President of Field Sales here at EBSCO. Greg will be sharing information on tools that can assist you in your learning and development needs. So Greg, I am passing it over to you, and take it away.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Fred. I really appreciate that. And we love having experts like Fred come on and support our webinar training opportunities like today, because one of the things that EBSCO is the leader in is providing expert opinion, expert authorship, thought leaders from an online perspective, so that you as an organization can do self-directed learning, you can support formal learning, informal learning, and we want to be able to provide those tools for you. One of the key resources that we provide is a product called Business Book Summaries. Our Business Book Summaries is one of the most popular resources that we have in the informal learning arena. We're happy to bring on experts like Fred, key publishers like Harvard, in order to provide a wealth of resources in which you can have available to you on a 24/7 basis. Our resources in this content area are over 3,000 strong. We provide between 5 and 7 new summaries each week, and again, it fits perfectly within everybody's very busy work schedule. We also provide leadership and management video collection. Again, our video collection continues to expand. We provide this, again, 24/7 access, and it really is built around the best practices of the top thought leaders in the industry. We try to make all the videos available within a 2 to 5 minute span. We try to make them very informative, the best quality that we're able to aggregate and build around the competencies in which companies are asking for on a weekly and monthly basis. We also developed competency center reports. These are built around white papers, research that we have done in order to provide you with access about what does each of these competencies mean and what do they mean at different levels of your organization. It's a springboard for creating the foundation for each of the competencies that you as an organization are looking to support. We also have a vast ebook collection. Again, while the book summaries are very popular, the ebooks are going to provide you obviously cover-to-cover access of the entire title, such as what is the one that Fred has authored, and we can provide that to you again 24/7 across multiple platforms that you as an organization want to be able to provide. And then bringing together the different resources that we have as an organization, we have built a platform called the Leadership and Management Learning Center. We have both out-of-the-box solutions as well as solutions that can be customized to meet your integration and access needs. Our Leadership and Management Learning Center consists of magazine and journal content, book summaries, ebooks, videos, competency reports, but more importantly, we're building it around the competencies that, as an organization, you want to highlight, that you want to make available on a daily basis in order to increase the culture, the leadership qualities at every level within your organization, and that are built to be customized to meet your needs. We're also making available the different resources so that they go beyond just the competencies you look to highlight. On a daily basis, you never know what issues, concerns may come up. And so we also want to be able to give your employees the opportunity to expand upon those 8 to 10 specific competencies you may want to highlight and make available, hundreds of topics that are key to the growth of your organization. We want to certainly thank you for the opportunity to give us your time today. We spent about 45 minutes here today. I certainly want to thank Fred again for his time and his expertise, and also encourage you to visit EBSCO's learning resources at ebscohost.com/learning-resources.com. Again, thank you for your time, and I know that Jessica will be sending out an additional email with all the information from today. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, so much. And yes, as Greg mentioned, in a few days we will have an email thanking all of you who have attended. And if you want to stay on the line after we end this webinar, you will have the chance to download a business book summary of Fred's latest book. So again, thank you everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. Big thank you to Fred. And again, thank you for bearing with us in the technical difficulties. And thank you, Greg. So hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again. Bye.